I never thought I'd find myself in a situation like this, honestly. Julie and I had been together for nearly 10 years. We met in college, got married right after, and for the most part, I always believed we had a solid, no-nonsense kind of relationship. She was sharp, a little bitchy at times, but I loved her for it. She's the kind of woman who could cut through your bullshit with a glance and then make you laugh about it later. But something changed about 6 months ago. At first, I just chalked it up to stress. The world was falling apart, everyone's mental health was shot, and the economy was a mess. That's when I started noticing small things, her phone buzzing more often, her being a little more defensive when I asked questions. She'd get strange when I brought up the air quality logs that I'd been obsessively checking since the atmospheric crisis started. That's another thing. Our house has a smart air filtration system I installed after the air quality started nosediving. I'd been monitoring the oxygen levels, particulate counts, CO2, all of it. And sure, a lot of people are obsessed with their health right now. But I knew something was off when I saw the logs, because I had a secondary, independent system that I'd been testing for months just to verify the main system. I've been tracking our oxygen consumption, and for the most part it looked normal. But then out of nowhere I noticed something strange. Certain times of the day, especially late at night, the oxygen consumption logs from the main system and my backup system showed synchronized spikes. Not just slight increases, big ones. At first I thought maybe it was some glitch, or maybe I was imagining it. But then I started paying attention. That's when I realized Julie was the one who was always in the room during these spikes. She'd be acting weird, defensive, and dismissive when I pressed her about it. She'd say I was paranoid, that the logs were just a coincidence, that I was imagining things because I was stressed out. But I knew better. Something wasn't adding up and I wasn't going to let it go. One night I stayed up late just watching the logs as I often did. I had the room dark, my laptop open, and I kept checking the oxygen levels, trying to catch whatever it was that was triggering these patterns. And then, right around midnight, I saw her. Julie slipped out of bed, quietly tiptoed into the study where I kept the logs and started fiddling with the settings on the backup system. I was stunned. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. She was intentionally manipulating the oxygen consumption logs, trying to cover something up. I knew then she was cheating, but not just in the usual way. She was sharing air with someone else, someone she didn't want me to know about. It's like a punch to the gut. The betrayal wasn't just emotional, it was physical, invasive even. She was sneaking around during the worst atmospheric crisis in recent history, sharing air with another man while the world was struggling to breathe. I felt sick. Anger, sadness, a deep sense of betrayal. I didn't even know what to feel first. I wanted to scream, confront her right then and there, but I also knew I had to plan my next move carefully, because this wasn't just about infidelity anymore. It was about integrity, trust, survival, and I was damn sure I wasn't going to let her get away with it. The next morning I woke up feeling like I'd been hit by a freight train. My mind kept circling back to what I saw last night. Julie, sneaking around the study, tinkering with the system, trying to hide something. I kept replaying it over and over, each time feeling more betrayed and angry. The thing is, I wasn't just angry at her cheating. I was furious she thought she could get away with it during a crisis that everyone else was fighting just to breathe. It felt like a slap in the face, a personal attack. I decided I wouldn't confront her right away. No, I needed to gather more evidence, figure out exactly how deep this went. I started checking the logs more closely, cross-referencing all the times I'd seen those spikes. Turns out, it wasn't just once or twice. It was almost every night, sometimes multiple times. I also noticed that her phone was always ringing during those moments, calls she'd dismiss quickly or hide from me when I got near. The pattern was clear. She was hiding something and I needed proof. I began to set up a little surveillance, nothing fancy, just enough to catch her in the act again. I set my phone to record her whenever she moved around the house during the late hours. I also installed a hidden camera in the study, pointed at the air system controls. The plan was to catch her red-handed, and I knew I'd need to be meticulous because she was cunning. Julie had always been the kind of woman who could spin a web of lies faster than I could cut through it, but I was pretty good at catching her slips, especially now. A few nights later, I was watching the logs and recordings on my phone late at night, waiting for her to make a mistake. It was unsettling how calm and methodical I'd become about it all. That's what betrayed me the most, how I become so used to suspicion, so numb to the idea that my wife could betray me on this level. And then it happened. Around 11:45 p.m. I saw her again. She slipped out of bed, tiptoed into the study, and started fiddling with the backup system. I hit record heart pounding. I couldn't believe I was seeing it again, but this time I knew I had the smoking gun. She was deliberately sinking the oxygen logs, trying to cover her tracks, but I had the concrete proof now. As she fiddled with the system, I saw her smirk, a sneer of contempt, as if she knew she was getting away with something. That's when I finally realized the extent of her disdain. It wasn't just about cheating on me physically. She was also trying to hide her betrayal from the world from me during a crisis where every breath counted. I felt a mixture of shock and rage. Honestly, part of me wanted to burst into that room and drag her out screaming, but I held back, knowing I had to stay calm and plan my next move carefully. I stayed up all night rewatching the footage, pulling together every piece of evidence I could find. I couldn't believe I'd spent so many years trusting her, only to realize she'd been lying and sharing air with some other guy behind my back. How could she be so selfish, so reckless? By the time dawn broke, I knew I had enough to confront her. I was ready to show her that I wasn't going to be played for a fool, especially not during a global crisis where everyone was struggling just to breathe. It was time for the confrontation, and I was going to do it face to face, with all the evidence laid out on the table. I didn't care if she lied or tried to spin her way out of it. I was done being the naive husband. I was about to find out just how much she hated being caught. That afternoon, I decided to confront her. I knew I couldn't wait any longer. I had enough evidence, enough proof that she'd been sneaking around, manipulating the oxygen logs and sharing her air with another man during the crisis. I was furious, hurt, and honestly just exhausted from the emotional roller coaster. I had never imagined I'd end up here, feeling like I was living in some twisted betrayal nightmare. I called her into the living room, kept my voice steady, almost too steady, like I was trying not to lose my shit completely. She came in, standing there with that signature bitchy smirk, trying to act like nothing was wrong. I could see the flicker of annoyance in her eyes when she realized I wasn't going to play her game. I laid the laptop down on the coffee table, turned the screen toward her, and pressed play on the footage I'd been collecting. The room went silent. Her face froze as she watched herself fiddling with the system late at night, trying to erase the logs, trying to hide what she was doing. At first, she tried to deny it. "That's not what it looks like," she snapped, crossing her arms. "You're just paranoid. You're obsessing over these stupid logs. I was probably fixing something, maybe a glitch. You always jump to conclusions, you know that." Her voice was defensive, but her eyes betrayed her. I could see the flicker of guilt, the flicker of someone who knew she'd been caught. But I wasn't buying her bullshit. I told her to shut up. I told her I'd seen enough. I told her that her lies, her manipulations, her deception, they'd gone on long enough. I didn't need her to admit anything right then. I had the evidence, and that was enough. I looked her dead in the eyes and told her I knew she'd been sharing air with that guy, that she'd been sneaking around, ignoring the gravity of what was happening around us. I told her I was done with her lies. Her reaction was classic. She started crying, but it wasn't the kind of genuine tears you'd expect from someone truly remorseful. No, it was a crocodile act, a pathetic attempt to look innocent. She spat out that I was crazy, that I was overreacting. She said she loved me, but that she also needed something more, something I obviously wasn't giving her. She called me boring, said I was suffocating her with my obsession over the air system. That's when I saw the real bitchy side come out. She told me I was a control freak, that I was imagining things, that I was just some paranoid husband. I felt every emotion all at once. The shock of her lying so effortlessly, the fury at her betrayal, the sadness that I'd loved someone who could be so callous. I sat there for a moment, trying to process it all. I wanted to shake her, scream at her, tear her apart with words. but I kept my cool. I told her she had two choices. She could come clean or I was done. I said I wasn't going to stay in a marriage where I couldn't trust her, where she thought she could share her air with some guy while the rest of us were fighting just to breathe. She looked at me, eyes red, breath ragged. Then she said she'd think about it, as if that would save her. I knew then I wasn't going to get the honest truth right away, but I didn't care. The damage was done. I had the proof, and no amount of her bitchy lies could undo that. I left her standing there, knowing that I'd just stepped into a new chapter of my life, one where trust had been shattered, and the only thing left to do was decide what came next. That night, I lay awake replaying the entire confrontation. I kept thinking about how she looked at me with that fake crying face, how she spun her lies so effortlessly. It made me realize something. I'd been so blind, so naive. I kept asking myself how I let someone like her get so good at hiding the truth. I kept asking if there was any point in trying to save what was broken, or if I should just cut my losses. Honestly, part of me already knew the answer. But I also knew one thing for sure: I'd never trust her again. I'd spent years investing in that trust, and she threw it away like it was nothing. And now I was left trying to pick up the pieces, wondering how I got to this point and whether I'd ever get back the peace I once had. After that night, everything changed. I felt like I was walking around in a fog, not sure if I was more angry, hurt, or just exhausted. The house suddenly felt too empty, too cold without her bitchy smirk and her constant nagging. I kept replaying her lies, the way she spun her stories, and how easily she dismissed everything that mattered. Honestly, for the first few days I was just angry. Pure, burning rage directed at her for betraying me during what might be the worst atmospheric crisis in modern history. But as the days went on, the shock started to wear off, replaced by a strange kind of clarity. I realized that this betrayal wasn't just about some infidelity. It was about her contempt for everything I believed in, her reckless disregard for our safety, and her sheer selfishness. She was willing to risk our health, our lives even, just so she could hide her little affair. That realization made me feel sick, more than sick. It made me feel like I'd been a fool for so long, trusting her to be the person I thought I knew. I started making plans. I knew I couldn't just walk away without leaving some kind of evidence or message. I had to make her understand just how deep her betrayal was. I also knew that I needed to protect myself, emotionally and physically, because I wasn't going to let her manipulate me anymore. I decided to get a lawyer just to understand my options, and I started gathering all the evidence I had: the logs, the recordings, even her secret text messages. I wanted her to see that I wasn't just some naive husband getting duped. I was serious about this, about ending it, or at the very least, making her face the consequences. One night I sat in the dark, staring at all the data I'd compiled. It was a lot more than I'd ever expected. It told a story of deception, of her sneaking around, of her lying to my face when I tried to have honest conversations. I felt rage flare up again, but this time it was tempered with a strange sense of purpose. I wasn't just angry anymore. I was determined. She thought she could get away with sharing her air, her intimacy, her betrayal during a crisis, and somehow I'd just accept it. No way. I was going to make her regret it. I also started considering how I'd tell the world, or at least close friends and family. I wasn't planning on shaming her outright, but I knew I'd have to explain why I was walking away. I wondered if she'd try to spin it, make herself look innocent. She always did have a talent for lying, for painting herself as the victim. But I had enough evidence to show she'd been lying, hiding, cheating. I wasn't going to let her twist the story anymore. This was about respect, about integrity. If she thought she could do whatever she wanted, even during a global crisis, then she was wrong. In the meantime, I kept my distance. I stayed locked in my own head, trying to process it all. I realized that a part of me still loved her, somehow, despite everything that was true. But love isn't enough when trust is broken, especially on this level. I knew I had to decide whether to fight for the marriage or walk away for good. Honestly, right now, I was leaning toward leaving. I couldn't imagine going back to a relationship where I'd been so thoroughly betrayed, where she thought she could just lie her way out of this mess. The hardest part was the aftermath, knowing that I'd never see her the same way again. Everything we shared, every moment I thought was real, now felt like a lie. I never thought I'd be that guy, the one who catches his wife sharing her air during a crisis, but here I was. And trust me, it changes you. It makes you question everything. The worst part, I knew this wasn't just about her cheating. It was about her disdain for the world, her reckless attitude, her refusal to see the bigger picture. And that's what cut the deepest. I thought I knew her, but I was wrong. And now, I just had to figure out how to move forward with that knowledge. The decision to finally confront her was the hardest thing I've ever done. I knew I couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine, because it was. I was angry, heartbroken, but mostly just tired of her bullshit. That evening, I sat her down again, this time with a full stack of the evidence laid out on the table. The logs, the recordings, her secret texts, all of it. I looked her straight in the eyes and told her I knew what she'd been doing, how she'd been sharing her air with some guy behind my back during a crisis when everyone else was fighting just to breathe. Her face twisted into that same bitchy smirk, like I was a fool for ever trusting her. She tried to deny it, of course, spun a bunch of lies about how it's not what it looks like, how she was only trying to relieve stress, and that I was just being paranoid. That she loved me, but sometimes you gotta do what makes you happy, she said with that infuriating sneer. I couldn't take it. I told her she was a selfish, manipulative bitch. Excuse my language, but that's exactly what she is, and I was done putting up with her lies that I was leaving that night. She started crying then, real tears this time, fake or not, they were convincing enough. She begged, said she never meant to hurt me, that she loved me and was sorry, said she'd never do it again. But honestly, I didn't care. I'd heard enough. I told her that love wasn't enough anymore, that her lies had broken whatever little trust we had left, and I couldn't do this anymore. I was done being her punching bag, her fool, her idiot who believed every word she spat out. I packed a bag that night, just enough to get me out of the house and away from her venomous manipulations. I kept my phone close, ready to record if she tried anything else. Honestly, I felt like I'd been set free, like I'd finally woken up from a nightmare. I told her that I'd be staying somewhere else for a while just to clear my head. She begged again, said she'd change, that she'd do anything to fix this. But I knew better. I knew she was just saying what she thought I wanted to hear. I'd heard that before. As I walked out that door, I looked back at her, her face twisted in a mixture of anger, guilt, and desperation. I felt a strange numbness settle over me. Part of me wanted to run back, to believe her tears, to give her a chance to fix things. But another, stronger part knew I couldn't. Not after everything I'd seen, everything I'd uncovered. That betrayal had broken something inside me that I didn't think could be fixed. The next few days were a blur. I stayed at a friend's place trying to sort through my feelings. I was angry at myself for trusting her this long, angry at her for being so selfish and reckless. But I was also relieved in a way. No more lies, no more sneaking around, no more sharing her air with someone else while the world was fighting just to breathe. It felt like I'd been finally freed from her grip, though it still hurt like hell. That's when it hit me. I'd been living in her shadow for too long. I'd let her manipulate me, deceive me, and even during a crisis, she thought she could get away with sharing her air with some guy. I realized I had to rebuild myself from the ground up. I had to learn how to trust again, but in myself, not her. I promised myself I wouldn't fall for her lies again, no matter how convincing her crocodile tears might be. I had to find my own way forward, and part of that was accepting that some betrayals are impossible to undo. I just hoped I'd be strong enough to leave the pain behind. In the weeks that followed, I focused on healing myself, trying to put the pieces back together after being shattered so thoroughly. Honestly, it wasn't easy. Every time I thought I was moving on, something reminded me of her. An old song, a scent, a memory, and the anger and disappointment would flood back. But I knew deep down that I couldn't let her betrayal define me. I had to find a way to rebuild my trust in myself, learn to breathe again without feeling like I was suffocating in her lies. I started therapy, not just to deal with the emotional aftermath, but to understand how I'd been so blind for so long. It helped me see that I'd trusted her because I wanted that comfort, that stability. But now I understood that real trust isn't just handed over, it's earned, step by step. And I wasn't going to let anyone take that from me again. Not her, not anyone. I also cut ties with her family and mutual friends who tried to convince me to stay or believe her crocodile tears. I realized I didn't need anyone's permission to walk away from something toxic, even if it hurt to do so. The truth is, discovering her affair with the air quality engineer during a crisis was a wake-up call. It exposed her true character, her selfishness, her contempt for what mattered, her willingness to risk everything just to hide her lies. It also made me see how important it is to trust myself, to listen to my instincts. I always knew something was wrong, but I brushed it aside because I wanted to believe in her good side. Turns out her good side was just a mask for her contempt and reckless self-interest. Looking back, I realize I learned a lot from all of this. Betrayal cuts deep, but it can also teach you resilience. It strips away the illusions and forces you to face reality, no matter how messy or painful. I've come to accept that sometimes, love isn't enough to fix what's broken, especially when trust is shattered beyond repair. But I also learned that I am stronger than I thought. I survived her lies, her manipulations, her blatant disregard for everyone else's safety. And I'm finally starting to breathe again, slowly but surely. To anyone out there who might be going through something similar, trust your gut. Don't ignore the signs, even if they seem small. Because in times of crisis or not, honesty and respect are everything. If someone betrays you, especially during a moment when everyone needs to stand together and fight for what's right, that betrayal says more about them than it does about you. You deserve someone who values you, who respects you enough to share their air, their honesty, their life. I've learned that the hard way. Now I'm just focusing on rebuilding my life, breathing in the fresh air I finally feel I deserve.